and good evening. I'd like to welcome you to yet another edition of the Columbus Report. I'm very fortunate to have with me here at the round table tonight from the 28th District, Jonathan Deaver. Jonathan, glad you can join us.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Not a problem. Always love to speak the great 28th District with you as always.
Well, it's always good to have this filmed in the 20th District. So
it is very fitting.
Yes,
so very fortunate to bring some new news that's coming out from our area. We're going to start out with a little remembrance with Nancy Reagan and Just Say No in bringing up a couple of House bills that you've been a part of that are combating what we're still seeing as the great drug dilemma that's hit our area.
It was a sad loss yesterday. But,
it truly was.
She had a great run, 94 years old. If I could be half as lucky as she, I think it would be a good life. But I still remember she was kind of my first lady as a child, if that makes sense.
It is. You know, a lot of us, we're similar in age in the fact that, we know Rosalind, but I think I agree with you that Nancy was truly my first lady.
That's right. Yeah. So her and her husband were, during the 80s when I grew up, those were the two folks that you saw, and and she held the office with a lot of class and dignity and poise, and I think she'll be missed and remembered by a lot of folks as well. So,
I greatly agree.
My condolences to their family, but she had a great life, and she made a huge impact on us, even though she never held office.
No, but she held a special place in our heart, and
Absolutely.
I think that's important. And of course, going by her slogan, "Just Say No," I think we're still seeing that effect many years today. You had started out with House Bill 171, which was to help decrease the minimum amount of heroin involved in a violation. You and Representative Blessing were working on that, and I kind of find that fitting, considering Cole Rain started the great heroin task force with Dan Malloy and his staff up there. Your involvement in that, and what made this House bill, where it is. I mean,
Sure.
it's a great start to combating a problem that we're seeing not just in the 28th, 29th District, Hamilton County, but nationwide.
Yeah, I think there's two components to dealing with heroin, and when you talk to all the elected officials, the folks that are the first responders dealing with us out on the street, there's a couple of components. One is the treatment side, and the treatment side not only deals with those that are addicted and struggling in the treatment facilities like Cat House and Talbert, but also providing first responders with the anti-drug, which they can inject and save lives, which we've done as a legislature this term. So I think those two pieces are highly important. But more important is, from a different perspective, is trying to choke off the vast volume of this stuff that's coming through our county. And that's where House Bill 171 is trying to respond to law enforcement and also to some of the judges who, quite frankly, say, it seems odd to me that someone can walk around with a bunch of marijuana and a bunch of heroin and we treat them the same, but if you're walking around with a bunch of crack cocaine or powder cocaine, they go to prison.
Right.
And so what we've heard from law enforcement and the judiciary is, why can't we just treat crack cocaine, powder cocaine, and heroin the same for purposes of criminal sentencing, especially when we're looking at classifying someone as a major offender.
Correct.
So that's all this bill does. It doesn't do anything else. We have other bills in the House that are dealing with the treatment side. Like I said, we had a bill earlier in the general session that passed the House unanimously in the Senate that's dealing with the first responders so that they have the equipment and the drugs they need to take care of those that overdose out in the field. So that's already done and out there. Representative Sprague has been working on treatment bills and dealing with some immunity bills that allow, if you're in an environment where a friend of yours has overdosed, you can call law enforcement and say, hey, or you can call 911 and have them come and help save that person's life without fear of going to jail yourself. So we have some immunity bills that are out there to try to help get the treatment and get folks into treatment and save their life. And I'm also carrying a bill that deals with that type of a space on a college campus. But this particular bill itself is just dealing with trying to marry out the major offenders.
Why, again, obviously this has become such a greater epidemic than we anticipated. I don't think anybody saw this on any radar coming anywhere. But why would we not have looked at this to begin with and have married the cocaine with heroin as opposed to just, well, it's another offense and then moving on?
It's a good question. I think most things are reactive. So, crack cocaine and powder cocaine were kind of the drugs when, Nancy Reagan was saying,
it's true.
Say no. Those were the things that were permeating crack cocaine specifically the inner cities, and the powder cocaine more the suburbs.
Yeah.
But that stuff was out there in the 80s. Heroin has always been around. It spikes and it goes up and it goes down and disappears. For those of you that like old cowboy westerns, you'll hear the term laudanum. Well, laudanum was basically a derivative of the opium plant, which is also a highly addictive drug that took a lot of lives back then. So I think we go through different cycles based on what's available, what's the cheapest, and then these things that are highly addictive, they tend to have greater consequences. So right now we know that most of this is coming out of Mexico. There's a huge drug war down there. So I think what we really are trying to figure out as a community is how do we manage this? I mean, there are kids that are in the high schools here in the district that are addicted to this stuff. There's people in the, I think we're number 2 in the state in overdose deaths as a county. And we are the main corridor and highway for the trafficking of this drug coming
75
up our,
sure doesn't,
right. Right, as much as we need a new bridge, that's where it's coming. So I think what we're trying to figure out is how do we give law enforcement the tools they need to choke off the supply, but also give folks that are down at the Cat House and Tower House the tools that they need to treat folks that are addicted.
Sure.
The biggest problem with this stuff is that these drug dealers are predators. I mean, they're actually, if you go down and visit the Cat House or the Tower House, you can see them kind of patrol in the outside loop of those facilities waiting for their past customer to get out so that they can give them another fix. And so even if you're trying to make your life better, even if you're trying to get off these drugs, these folks are predators. I mean, they'll blow up your phone with texts and emails, and we've seen cases in Columbus where folks have gotten off, they admitted they had a problem, they went into treatment, wanted to get it done, got out, were being productive, and their drug dealers were just lighting up their phones and showing up at their house and sending them emails and constantly putting that pressure on them until they cracked. And so, that's another part of this equation that we really haven't figured out yet. But the reality of it is these folks are predators. I mean, heroin's a different kind of drug. This is not, your typical, high school kid experimenting with marijuana.
No.
This is something that's going to kill you, given the right set of circumstances.
But I think you're talking as early as high school and probably even younger. I mean, unfortunately, but I mean, we're seeing kids experimenting early, this is a drug that has no age limit. I think when we saw in the 80s, as we did, cocaine was that older drug.
True.
Until today, I mean, call it a designer drug, call it what you will. I think you're seeing the more ready nature of something like this.
Well, and the other part of it too it's very fascinating is it doesn't know any socioeconomic boundaries. No. It doesn't discriminate based on whether you live in the inner city or whether you live in the most expensive suburb in the county or the state.
Which is what we saw with cocaine and why we have the division, I guess you could say.
And so I think the reality of where we are now is, we know this drug kills people. We know that these folks are predators. It's actually more dangerous than the prior two that we're talking about. It's more dangerous than powder cocaine for sure. Crack cocaine is debatable, but it's definitely more dangerous. And we know that folks are lacing and cutting this stuff with fentanyl, which makes it even more deadly and more prone to an accidental overdose death. So trying to get our heads around all of this it's a challenge. I think as a county we've done a lot to respond to it with the task force. The sheriff, the county commissioners have been working very well together with local law enforcement to try to find a solution. So, Representative Blessing and myself, we are responding to members of that task force asking us for a tool, just a tool to deal with the supply side. And that's really all 171 is supposed to be, is just a tool for them to try to arrest and choke off the major offenders. I think to put in perspective, I mean, what this does is you have to carry around $60,000 worth of heroin, roughly, which works out to be about 3.5 years of personal use, which no user's going to have, in order to be treated as a major drug offender under this legislation. So that's a lot of heroin. It's not a small amount, and all we're trying to do is treat it the same way as the other two for the major classification. And at the same time, the legislature is being responsive to help out the Cat House and Talbert House and the treatment facilities. And like I said, we've already responded to the EMS request for an antidote to the overdose.
Right. Of course, with these type of changes, you're looking at this change in classification. If someone were to be with that much on their possession, what kind of punishment are we looking for when it comes to?
Yeah, it's 11 years.
11 years, okay.
Yes.
I guess you have to ask the question, is 11 years long enough?
Well, I don't know, and quite frankly, I tend to default on the side of not having mandatory minimums.
Sure.
I prefer judicial discretion for a couple of different reasons. not one size fits all in anything in life. You know, it doesn't work with shirts, it doesn't work with pants, it doesn't work with shoes, and it certainly doesn't work when you're talking about law enforcement and figuring out how to properly sentence someone. So there's a lot of mitigating factors that go into someone's criminal behavior, and those things need to be dealt with by the trier of fact, which is the judge that we elect. So if the judge is getting it wrong and they do something that the public doesn't like, don't think for a second that there's not going to be an election where folks respond based on how they're dealing with it. And quite frankly, I've never met a judge, regardless of political affiliation, regardless of their ideology, that was weak on crime. I've never met one. Now, folks may say, well, in that particular case, you didn't sentence them to this amount of time. But then again, that's the discretion dealing with the facts of that case.
Correct.
So I think it's better if we can find a way to get more tools to the judges to sentence them appropriately, more tools for prosecutor's office to make judgment calls so that they can exercise some discretion in how they want to charge folks. So really what we're trying to do in the statute right now is marry it, treat it the same. There's also a criminal recodification committee that's looking at the sentences themselves and how we're going to treat sentencing. So this bill is really not meant to deal with the mandatory minimum component or the mandatory maximum component. It's more to deal with, let's treat each one of these the same way under the law.
Let's clean up and get things moving that way.
Correct.
Of course, I'm going to put my horns on as I normally do and play the advocate here, but how do you feel that this may or may not affect the prison population, considering
Great question.
what we got?
We've reached out to DRC, which is the Department of Corrections, and we had them communicate with the Legislative Service Commission to find out what this would cost us and how many folks they believe would end up spending additional time. And according to them, it's a rounding error. We're talking, you know, $40,000, $50,000, which is a rounding error, and in most departments, you know, even in the school system, it's a rounding error. And we're talking about a $8 to $10 billion prison system. So we're talking about a very, very small percentage of folks that would get grabbed in this first run. But these are the people that are bringing massive quantities and then breaking it up down into the street level. So that's what we're trying to do is get after. It's very, very targeted for the major folks bringing in mass quantities of this drug into our county.
In doing your research for this and other bills, and again, we're going to be talking about 270 here, which is a good merger here. Talking with the task force, what are you seeing, namely in the 28th district, that really helped propel you and Mr. Blessing to move forward with this, and then also working with Representative Polanda on 270. Yeah, obviously, there was a lot that you've seen that needs to make these changes happen.
Yeah, well, I think part of it too is that in the legislature, folks are always looking for people who have some sort of subject matter expertise or some ability to provide extra value on a piece of legislation. So for Billy and myself working on 171, it was kind of a combination of law enforcement from his community, and some good conversations with law enforcement in the 28th, but mainly countywide. I mean, this is a countywide problem.
Yes.
It's in my schools, it's in his schools, it's in everybody's schools. It's everywhere, and it's on our streets, and it spills over right into here in Forest Park. I mean, we're seeing it. We've had some shootings and some issues with that here. So it's countywide. It's everywhere. And so it's a matter of working together to try to get the best possible outcome. And so really, when you're looking at House Bill 171, it's more of two folks in Hamilton County who want to look at it. Billy was looking at it from the law enforcement perspective. Right. I was approached by about 5 or 6 judges on the common pleas level wanting some sort of tool or resource. I was actually working on a bill independently of Bill, and then he sent out his request at the same time I was getting ready to send mine out. I said, well, wait a second, we're trying to do the same thing.
Let's merge this.
So let's merge this and come together and bring both sides together, bring the judiciary and law enforcement together to say this is how we want to try to tackle the major offenders. And so it kind of organically came together.
Sure.
With the 270, with Representative Polanda, Dorothy and I were talking about how do we deal with the deaths that occur from the overdose.
Correct.
And our county prosecutor and some of the law enforcement asked me to take a look at how we deal with the involuntary manslaughter statute, because there's some families and a lot of folks that believe that if this drug dealer is a predator and he's out there, especially right out at Talbert House or out at some drug treatment facility, and they're patrolling and they're basically they are a predator, and they come in and they inject you and you die, there should be some accountability for that death. And so that's really what House Bill 270 is trying to figure out. So we introduced the statute to move it more towards a strict liability rather than a foreseeability. So under the current law, the drug dealer says, all he has to say is, well, I've sold you drugs before and he never overdosed, so no responsibility.
Right.
Versus, well, I gave it to him and he died, so now we're going to hold you accountable for it. So we're trying to flesh that out and work through the law on how we want to treat it. And we're looking at the higher level offenders. So again, going after the major drug offender.
Right.
So even if it's the guy outside that did it, then he can, kind of, the prosecutors can work their way up the food chain and they can squeal all the way up to get the major guy and get the major guy responsible for that death. Because quite frankly, the guy on the street, most of the time they're also an addict, most of the time, not all the time. But they're also not necessarily the ones that are cutting it and adding the fentanyl and those other things. So we're still trying to figure this out. We're working with BCI and the Attorney General's office to try to figure out how to best frame this issue, number one. Number two, we want to make sure that we're not getting anybody who's a low-level offender, who's a boyfriend-girlfriend using together. We don't want some user whose boyfriend or girlfriend dies because they're shooting each other up, going to prison for 20 years. I mean, that's not what we want to do. So we're trying to figure out how to specifically go after the major offender, hold the major offender responsible for any deaths that occur from their product. No different than we do for anything else in this country. We hold Ford and Chrysler and Chevrolet responsible for defective products. We hold our pharmaceutical industries responsible for defective products. We do that across the board in every industry. This is a little bit different, and it's harder to figure out because, number one, who provided it, who cut it,
well,
and so there's all these elements that are highly complicated. So we're relying on the expertise of the Attorney General to help sort through that as we work this through committee.
Obviously, you brought up some great analogies, things you don't think about. The car industry, the true pharmaceutical industry, we don't think they take the responsibility, but they do.
That's right.
Ultimately, they do.
That's right.
Now, this is coming into what I would say some new territory for us. I don't think we've seen this when it comes to illicit drug use. To find and to actually place responsibility of death, which is what occurs, I don't believe I've ever seen before. By going about this and tackling it this way, you've obviously stated that you've used that type of framework that we've seen from, again, like we said, the car industry and things like that. What have we seen other states take on something to this effect, or have we looked at, obviously statewide or nationwide, using that as framework?
Yeah. Now there are other states that have done it or are trying to do it.
Okay.
Now some states have done it and the results are mixed. So that's part of the problem is, we're trying to learn from other states that have tried to do this. Mm-hmm. And, there's been some, the nice part is there's a laboratory where we're getting some product out so we can see the results. We're not all 100% happy with those results that they're getting. So I think that's part of the challenge is working through this. Mm-hmm. And this can't just be, one representative from one district out of 99. This has to be a collaborative effort. That's why we're really leaning on, BCI, which is, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation for the state. They have a lot of expertise in dealing with the investigation side, but also trying to figure out how things, who's responsible, who cut it, where did the drugs originate. They have all of that science and all that, the CSI folks out there that watch those shows. That's what they do. And so we're waiting kind of on their guidance in that regard on how do we best frame this. And I know it sounds very technical, but what we're looking for is the exact subset paragraph of the section of the code to tie this to, and it might mean, subparagraph X, Y, Z, or A and C or whatever, to tie this correctly in our law to really get the outcome that we're looking for. When you talk to prosecuting attorneys, there's some counties, specifically up in Akron, there's some jurisdictions up there where they charge for involuntary manslaughter. Now, to the best of my knowledge, they've never gotten a conviction because people plea out at that point. And so they're not getting, it's not like a jury is finding them guilty on the charge. Right. So they're adding it as a charge, but they're never trying it. And I don't know if it would actually stick. Our county prosecutor has made a decision not to add that as a charge because in his belief and in his analysis of the law, there's no way that you can prove foreseeability. So it has to be foreseeable that they would have overdosed and die. That's a very high burden. And if you've been a drug dealer and you've been the personal dealer to this individual for any length of time, then all you have to say is, they've used before, they've bought before. How would I have known? And that's your defense. And so in that county, they're using it as a charge, but we have not seen it up there. And when I talked to one of there was a reporter up there that asked me about this bill earlier and provided me some of the statistics. And in the statistics that she shared, we are not seeing this going to a jury or a trier of fact at this point up there. So they're charging it, but they're not actually litigating it.
Got it.
And so I think the issue is if we litigate it, the belief of our county prosecutor is he would lose. Up there, they haven't had, they're holding people accountable for the death, but at this point, they haven't litigated it to determine whether or not it will hold. Does that make sense?
It does. And if we were, I guess the biggest question, and we're trying to go in this, is how do you enforce that? That's at least the main question I think anybody would ask.
And that's part of what the committee process is for. So with House Bill, what I typically like to do is I like to get a bill, I like to work on it, I like to meet with everybody and work through all the complexities of the issue, introduce the bill, and also work with all the members of the legislature before I do, so I have buy-in. That's part of the reason why I've had 7 bills go through unanimously, bipartisan co-sponsors, bipartisan on both all through the House. But on issues like this that are highly complicated, sometimes you need to introduce them and let that committee process work out because it will bring in different points of view that you otherwise wouldn't get. Fair. Sometimes you can get all those points of view to show up in advance, but this one's highly complicated. And really what we need to hear from parents that have gone through this. And to get them to engage sometimes, you have to introduce it so they're aware of it because the public, there's 11.5 million people, and when you can get a bill introduced, and folks like yourself will talk about it and get it on camera so that other folks know that it exists, then they also then have the opportunity to give me some feedback on what happened to their child and how did it happen, and we can get a copy of those text messages and those emails and we can find out really what's going on behind the scenes so the policy itself then can actually be effective. And so that's really kind of where we are with this. I mean, this is House Bill 270, so it was introduced a while ago.
Yeah. And
we've been working almost a year on it, trying to get that feedback and figuring out exactly how do we tackle this in an intelligent way.
It almost, in that kind of definition that you're giving to it, is definitely sounding like power of the people. How do you utilize, and I'm not saying use as in, blatantly beat it out of them, but you're using the power of the word and the power of other people's experiences to make this a reality and make this happen.
Well, that's my job.
But it's good to see this in true practice. It's something that you, unfortunately, either you see it, you know it happens, but a lot of people don't see that it's truly working.
Well,
and with something like this, I think we're seeing.
Well, I think it's also because we're so hyper-focused. I mean, it's a presidential year, right? So
correct.
Everybody's hyper-focused on the sideshows that we're seeing, and the reality of it is that I've always been a believer that the best government's local. I mean, the people in the district, they can find me. It's not hard. I had office hours last weekend, and people
Fair.
came, and so I'm available. You can call me at any time. You can email me. You put up my information. Exactly. Everyone knows how to get me, and I'm a member of the community. My kids are in the public schools. You're going to see me at soccer games and baseball games, and people come up to me and ask me about things all the time. So I think that's a subtle difference. And that federal stuff's so far removed, but that's what gets the attention, and that's where everybody focuses. So right. I think part of the process of what we do in Ohio is different because we actually are responsive, and we have to follow process in Ohio because guess what? Our citizens demand it.
Sure.
So, and it's harder to demand that the federal government follow process because they're so far away. And that's what this really is. This is a process. We're trying to figure out how do we deal with this mess. And the heroin problem is a giant mess. It's everywhere. It's a healthcare cost now. You think about how many areas this permeates. I mean,
well, I was just going to bring that up.
Health insurance. This is our Medicaid. Some folks, it's our Medicare. This drives the cost of treatment at the emergency rooms and the hospitals. People who use IV drugs tend to have higher health costs because
sure.
they're going to contract some sort of a disease that costs a lot of money, hepatitis C, HIV, and these all end up on the public dollar.
Right.
And it gets very expensive. So dealing with the addicted early is very important, trying to figure out a way to help them get up and out and off the drug. But we also got to stop the predator from grabbing them the minute they walk out of treatment. Right. We've got to give them a chance to survive and to recover. And recovery for this type of drug, it's not it's not one day I'm fine. This is a lifelong problem that they will always have. It's never going to go away.
It's not a week at a retreat, quote unquote, or a rehab facility, walk out and you're fine. This is something that we've been discovering. It has some very great mental problems that last and linger years past anybody who's been treated.
Yeah, and this is a drug that changes your brain chemistry forever.
Sure.
So this is not something that, it's not like going and having a beer and the next morning you're fine. I mean, this is something you wake up, you come off your high, and you will do anything it takes to find your next one. Mm-hmm. And you'll do things that you never thought you would ever do. You'll hurt people that you never thought you would hurt, and it's a vicious cycle. And the families that are trying to manage this and deal with this, it's a big challenge for them. And so how we deal with this is going to be evolving. We're going to need a lot of tools.
Sure.
You can't build a house with just a hammer,
no.
right? You need a lot of different tools, and this is, House Bill 270 is looking at a different way of trying to keep the drug dealers from selling this particular drug. They're always going to migrate and go to something else. They're always going to do that.
That's true.
And as long as we have a policy where everything's illegal, we're going to have these challenges. That's where we are. So, until the federal government takes a look at this in a different way, these are the challenges that we have as a state. But we've got to give law enforcement the tools they need to take the stuff that kills people off the street, specifically the people who are bringing it in by the truckload.
Do you feel that, obviously we are far from done, I think by our conversation that's there, where would you like to see the next step go to make this epidemic no longer a reality? I mean, I know that's
a great question. I don't know if any of us have the true answer. I know there's if we're really looking outside the box, there's other countries that have dealt with things in different ways than we have. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of lessons to be learned, and I think those are things we should study. I don't think anything's off the table, no matter what your perspective is on the war on drugs, whether it's you're opposed to it, whether you believe in full legalization of everything, or somewhere in between. Nothing should be off the table as we discuss how to deal with this. I think if we do that, we close our mind, and we need to have an open mind and be thoughtful and process-oriented as we figure out how to navigate this. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the best solution is not something that lines up with your personal belief or your personal political perspective, but at the end of the day, we have to do what's best for the kids that are growing up around here, that are being confronted with this and confronted with the peer pressure. One of the things that really bothers me about this, and we're still trying to figure out how to get our head around it, is that a lot of these first-time heroin addicts are kids who went and sampled a little marijuana at a party that was laced with heroin.
Wow.
And they're addicted all of a sudden, and then they go and they try to get another piece of, a little bit of marijuana from somewhere else, and it doesn't do it for them, and they don't know why, and they go back to the original dealer, and he injects them. And now he's got them. Yeah. And so these people are very creative, and they're going to get you addicted somehow, some way. And we really need to figure this out. And the problem is we're responding and reacting.
Right.
And we need to be almost proactive.
Correct.
And inoculate some of this. So I don't know what the perfect answer is. I think we're chipping away at it a day at a time. Part of it is trying to get into the mind of folks who have addictive personalities, trying to figure that out, trying to figure out why they go there. The other part of it is helping the folks that are addicted. And then I think the other component is dealing with the folks that are putting this poison into our streets. So I'm not sure how all this is going to come together. It's a work in process. Fair. And we've got a task force that's trying to provide us information. That's really what they are, as a resource for us. Mm-hmm. And then we respond based on what they find and what they gather, and same thing across the state and the nation. And
it sounds like we're not ending it at one point. It sounds like this is going to be ongoing until we find a full solution. And even after we find that solution, I think it's still going to be around.
Well, there may be something else.
Well, and there may be something else,
right.
and we hope that there isn't. And I know that's just me being very optimistic, but at the same time.
Well, my hope out of this is that, out of the tragedies that these families are facing, these individuals are facing, is that finally we'll come together on an approach to addiction and drug use that makes sense, that will transcend the next cycle. That's my hope. This is a little bit different. In the past, there's been some legitimate arguments that, well, it's concentrated in this neighborhood or concentrated in that neighborhood, and so slow to react or slow to respond. And it was easy to make judgment calls based on someone's socioeconomic status or where they're from. This is different, and I'm glad it's different because it affects everybody. So it's going to be the very first time that everyone has to come together to really try to tackle this in an intelligent, meaningful, purposeful, and long-term way.
And because of that, do you think we will, as a community and as a state, will look at addiction differently?
I hope so.
Those who are addicted?
I hope so. I really do. I think that if we do this correctly, I mean, if heroin's the catalyst, then so be it. But I think the reality of it is that we finally have to come to a point where we're taking this issue, which has been around since the dawn of mankind. Sure. But traditionally, it's been a big issue since Nancy Reagan made it an issue.
Right.
How are we going to do this and do it right once and for all? In the 80s, it was a response to a couple of bad actors and some organized crime. Today, the organized crime's still there. It hasn't gone away. But the difference now is that it's in every household, it's in every neighborhood. Pretty much everybody that you talk to knows somebody who's either using or recovering or has died from it. I have not met somebody who doesn't have at least a second or third, contact. Typically, it's 1 to 2 generations now. So it's affecting everybody. There's folks out there that have family members that are suffering from alcoholism, drug use. So addiction is addiction.
Right.
And so I think if we can figure out how to tackle this on this issue, but it's something that we can transcend across the board, then it doesn't matter what the next drug is, because we'll have the infrastructure and the tools and the knowledge to deal with it.
And to go forward.
Yes, sir.
Definitely. Well, I know that was such a heavy topic, but I mean, there are a lot of things that we need to discuss and bring. As you brought out, it's because of people and programs like this that are able to discuss it at length, as opposed to a 5-second news blip that this is what's going on.
30 seconds.
Or I give you a little bit more.
140 characters.
We don't tweet
Yeah,
all the time,
I
But anyway, going forward, and we're going to try to be a little more uplifting. Last June, it was brought to our attention, Save the Dream Ohio under foreclosures was starting to see an ending.
Correct.
You, with Christy Coons from the 32nd District, said, no, we need to continue the dream, keep the dream alive, so to speak.
Yeah, we did.
Again, this was created in 2008 out of a reaction to help prevent foreclosures, and we're talking anybody in the state of Ohio. Again, the idea was the applications were going to stop in August of 2014. Payments were to end in 2016. We're in 2016 now.
I know.
And where are we?
We did pass that resolution. We did send it to Congress. We asked them to restore the funding. It went through the House in a bipartisan way. Representative Coons and I were joint sponsors. We're on opposite sides of the aisle, but we've actually come to be quite fond of one another and work very well together. And we both agree that we're not done with this, and the promise was made to take it to a certain point, and they didn't do it. And so we put a resolution together. It went through the House, and it's sitting in Congress somewhere. So Speaker Boehner had it. Hopefully the current speaker has it. But again, it's a presidential year. I don't know what's going to happen in Congress, but it did pass the House, and it is in front of Congress, and hopefully they'll act on it. But again, this is a federal thing.
Sure.
So we were asking them to continue the work that they're doing in the state of Ohio. It made a huge difference in our neighborhoods and our communities. I mean, right here in Forest Park, this place was devastated by this by the foreclosure problem. When you walk around and go to streets, I mean, I would argue that in some neighborhoods it was 1 in 5, 1 in 6.
That seems about right.
Were in foreclosure or in the process, either at the beginning or abandoned. Just devastating impact on this neighborhood and this community, and across the county as well. Hamilton County was one of the major places where it happened and occurred in the state. So anything that we can do to balance the equation out. I mean, it's one thing you're giving a bank several $billion, but we know that over time they were sued and they admitted that they did some things that were wrong, and so the relief also needs to be equally shared for the folks that were taken advantage of, and that's all this is balancing the equation. So we'll see what Congress does, but it passed the House, and Representative Coons and I got it through, and so we'll see if they respond. But
that wasn't the only thing that you've done dealing with foreclosures as well. We're still dealing with this topic, and you've continued that crusade.
I did. So the other bill that we did pass is House Bill 303, which creates a brand new program which does not exist anywhere else in the country. It's called the Dollar Deed Program. That passed the House unanimously with 76 co-sponsors, bipartisan bill. We took it all the way through. It is in the Senate. We're
Okay.
expecting that in April when we come back that the Senate will have hearings on it, and we're hopeful that it will pass into law before we leave for summer break. What it basically does is it gives an option to banks and to homeowners that does not exist at this point. And right now, we're all familiar with the modifications. We're familiar with deeding your house to the bank and
Yes.
walking away. We're obviously acquainted with the short sale process where you're trying to sell it for less than what you owe, and if you're lucky, the bank won't hold you responsible, right? Those
No,
are the
it's-
three main ones. But what this would do is create a brand new item. So you would have to deed your property to the bank. But the difference is that you're going to get the right to buy it back within 2 years. So you can stay there, you can live there. You're going to be responsible for the taxes on the property like you normally would. You're going to be responsible to take care of the house like you normally would. The bank's not going to be a landlord, but you're going to have to make a rental payment to them.
Right.
The mortgage will stay in place on the property. The deed goes to the bank, but you get to stay there. And it gives you a 2-year window to get your stuff back together, to get your finances in order. So you can either reapply with the bank to take the mortgage back straight out under a refinance, or you can go to a third-party person and refinance out that mortgage and take title to your home again. So create some continuity in the neighborhoods. I mean,
Sure.
places like Forest Park here, where most of the time you're talking about a 3-month job loss, or maybe you had a sick mother, sick father, you had to go take care of them for a couple of months, you got behind. This will give you a chance to get back on your feet, stay in your home, keep your kids here in the school system,
Sure.
which I think is highly important, keeping those kids stable and in the same house, in the same neighborhood, keeps the tax revenue going to our local schools and our local government fund, so it gives them a tool to stay in their homes to rebuild and restore the neighborhood. So I'm really happy about that one. It went through unanimous. I'm hopeful that we should get that passed by the time we leave. And we also introduced House Bill 463, which is the big foreclosure bill that I was talking to you about. That's going to have all the bells and whistles and solves hopefully a lot of the problems. So one of the pieces that will be amended into the bill shortly is we're going to give our local city officials at the local level the power to move a house that's been, the zombie titles where
Sure.
the bank takes it all the way but doesn't sell it, right? And it
It's
sits
just
there
there.
empty.
Yeah.
The bank has a judgment, but it becomes blighted and the grass grows because the bank's not cutting the grass. The homeowner's long gone. So it's going to give the mayors, the city councils the right to tell the treasurer of the county who collects the taxes to expedite sale that, so it gets sold in 30 days to the highest bidder. So that's going to be part of that bill. We're also going to do an online foreclosure sale process so we can bid properties up and allow people from across the state or the country to bid on properties. But in order to do that, we're going to get your name, we're going to get your information, we're going to get your identifying data, and also make sure you have proof of funds. The last thing we want is somebody buying
buy
a
a
house and
foreclosed
not
home
doing
and not doing
anything
anything
with
with
it. So we're going to make sure that we're collecting that information, because right now, quite frankly, they don't. You bid it and you can create a shell LLC and we don't know who owns it, and that creates a lot of the blight and the abandonment in some of these neighborhoods. So these folks that maybe watch a TV show at 3, 4 in the morning and decide they want to buy a house, and then when they get into it, they don't know what to do with it.
Right.
But they put it into an LLC and we can't figure out who owns it. So it should help the local government, repair and replace and backfill that inventory in the cities, and which is going to help increase values on properties and neighborhoods. Right. It's going to stabilize the streets again. It's going to provide more revenue to the local government, put the kids in more kids in schools, more revenue to local schools. Kind of looking at it from a street level all the way up. So, and it's also going to work. We've got some fast track, expedited sale processes, moving a foreclosure faster if there's an abandoned property at the beginning. So if the bank forecloses on a house that's abandoned, shouldn't take 2 years. We can get it done quickly. So a lot of good reforms from not only the beginning, but also all the way through the sale.
So with something like a bill like this, do you foresee that this is maybe not an end all to be all, but at least it's now we know where to go to if anything even more drastic, God forbid, were to ever happen again?
And the idea behind these reforms is to make sure that we've got the tools in place and in statute to deal with it when it comes again. Because let's face it, it will. It always does. It's cyclical. There's going to be some hard times. There's going to be good times and hard times. That's called life. So we're going to see them again. There was a lot to learn off this last cycle.
Fair.
And I think what we need to do is take what we've learned, make adjustments to our law, which quite frankly haven't been done in a long time. some of our laws haven't been touched in 30 years, and think about all the changes in the regulations and the banking rules and real estate law. When you go buy a house and you close the stack of papers, it's almost a foot high at this point.
Just as bad as when you refinance. It's
Absolutely.
about half that,
and
but you know.
and that's all federal.
Yeah.
So part of it is providing resources for local governments so that they can have some stability in their neighborhoods. You know, when you talk to some of these families and you go walk down the street and you see it's not a happy thing for them. That, you know, they're not enjoying it. They don't like the fact that they're next to a house that is empty, and then, you know, it gives leeway for bad actors to go in and do things, and vandalism and crime and other types of things. So it's also about just kind of restoring that American dream for the folks that are living in these neighborhoods that, you know, these are blue-collar workers. These are our middle-class neighborhoods that are getting eviscerated, and give these folks the opportunity to rebuild and restore what they had and bring it back to where it should be.
Well, hopefully we will see these changes. And I think what's interesting about this is that you went to go local, and we brought that up earlier. You know, the idea is that, you know, the local levels where the real action kind of takes place, and especially when you're dealing with, we'll take Forest Park for a perfect example. Many of the neighborhoods just east of us here directly were greatly affected, and to some extent you could see that the council was tied. They wanted to do things with the neighborhood, they wanted to do things, and they couldn't get it done. Now with something like this,
well, my job is to provide tools and resources.
Sure.
I think we see these arguments all the time, especially right now in a presidential year. Everything's top down. You know, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do this. And then when you look at the things that are going on in Michigan and how terrible that is, you know, it's real easy to point a finger at somebody who's been in office for, you know, 2 years, but he wasn't around when they laid the foundation of that 67 years ago. And it's real easy to point fingers in politics rather than, you know, roll up your sleeves and solve problems as they come. You know, and for me, when there's a log jam at the local level, I just want to give them some tools so they can solve their own problem. It's not my job to come in and swoop in and tell Forest Park and Madeira and, you know, you know, Glendale and Springdale, et cetera, what to do. It's not my responsibility. That's why they have their local elected officials to solve the day-to-day things in their community and to make those plans. My job is to provide support and some structure and to help them alleviate some of the concerns that they have by giving them some tools and resources. So I don't, you know, there's a lot of folks that look at those that, well, you know, I work at the state, it's my job to tell you what to do. I don't look at it that way. We're from Hamilton County. We don't look at things that way. We like our local government because we actually know where they live. You know,
It's true.
We know our neighbors and we know where they are, and we can be responsive to the needs of our neighborhoods. So really what I want to try to do is just provide the resources, the tools, and do the best that I can do to keep Columbus out of the way as a kind of as a theory and an approach. But you know, when we're doing you know, heroin reform, when we're trying to tackle this issue, you need some help from the state. You're going to need some financial resources. You're going to need some tools that we can only provide. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the local folks that implement it.
Who implement it, exactly,
That's right.
and utilize what it was
That's
being
right.
done.
And so we can provide the guidance, and we can provide tools and research and data, and be responsive to the problems that they're facing and provide those resources. So, you know, we're going to have a capital budget here that we're going to be introducing shortly. There's going to be money in there for treatment, as an example, for heroin. It's our objective, the delegation of Hamilton County. We want to double the treatment beds in this county. I mean, that's our goal. We want to make sure that, you know, the Cat House, as an example, is one of the very few places that provides the detox and also the treatment. And we need to make sure that they've got the bandwidth to do it, because we're the only one in the entire region. So, you know, we've got you know, Northern Kentucky, Butler County, Claremont County, Warren County, they all come to us. So we're the regional leader, and we don't even have the facilities necessary to tackle the issue.
And if you don't have that, then how can you truly be a leader if you don't have everything ready?
Right.
Well, you know, again, we've tackled some heavy issues, but that doesn't. But again, giving that light allows for them to be flushed out, to be made better, to be made whole again. But we also have some great things going on as well. The appropriations budget has finally gone through, and you've gone through that. 28th District, what are you looking at? What you've seen that's going to be coming through, what are you most proud of that you're going to see in your district?
Well, I think so far, has it been 15 months now since I've been here? So, I mean, in 15 months, I'm overwhelmingly pleased with what we were able to accomplish for the district. Everybody remembers the school funding. We talked about that. We were successful. I mean, we took on the administration, and he said we were going to cut your schools by 25 cents on the dollar, and I looked him straight in the eye and said no. And the district was great. They responded, they came up, and we did that. We fixed that. And we got the funding in the budget. We fixed the budget. He line item vetoed 17, which we actually fixed last fall. So we put the language in a Senate bill, and then I made sure the appropriation with the help of leadership was in Senate Bill 208, so the money's there. So we got our money back. So that, and we gave a forecast so our schools can plan for 5 years, which was not out there. So now you can do your 5-year planning. So we did that. We also did some charter school reform, so we're holding them responsible to basic accountability standards, for crying out loud. So, I mean, that's just on the education side.
Sure.
We just got Winton Woods $900,000 in the
a straight A grant.
A straight A grant. Deer Park another $100,000. So all of those things that we talked about that we were going to do, we're getting those done. At the same token, he said, we talked about we're going to tackle this foreclosure issue. We're getting a lot of those things done. We talked about the heroin stuff that we're going to tackle, and we're going to get those pieces of legislation done. And then also the developmental disabilities bill that we passed last year.
Last year.
A model for the whole country. Everybody's looking to us now as the place to start their own ABLE accounts for their developmentally disabled families. So it's a win for everybody. And if we get it, and if we do it right, as I think we're going to get it right in Ohio, then not only do we become the national leader, but then our disability community basically gets to take advantage of these accounts for almost no cost. So it's a win for Ohioans. It's a win for our taxpayers. We're going to reduce spending in the space, give families the opportunity to. The governor likes to talk about lifting people up and out. Well, there you go.
There's a good story.
There's a good example of giving people the power to take care of themselves when they want to change their life and have their American dream, whatever it is. Whether they want to be a teacher, whether they want to be the next Bill Gates or Zuckerberg, whatever their dream is.
Sure.
Providing the opportunities and the ability to do that. So I think I'm really kind of happy where we are. There's a lot more to do. And we've got, as you can see, my plate's full.
Oh, absolutely,
We're still trying to tackle some of the systemic things, but also provide those other tools and resources we need. So you'll see more to come here shortly.
Well, which is great, because that gives us more to talk about, which is, again, as you said, we can easily make hours upon our discussions. And it's true, there's some great things going on. One thing before we start wrapping up, I like the way that you had framed it, that we are looking at something like the ABLE Act and things like that people are actually looking to Ohio again. It's something that we haven't heard in a very long time. I'll just say it, is now our time. Regardless of where you think Governor Kasich will go when it comes to certain things or what have you, do you think now is our time, Ohio being someplace to look at other than just being that purple state that'll help or make or break an election?
I think that's a great question, and I appreciate that. I firmly believe that Ohio has the capability to lead in every sector. We just need some leadership. We just need people to step up and do some things that make us visibly known for the skills that we have. We've got some of the best manufacturing in the country right here. We've got some of the best healthcare in the country. We've got some great IT folks downtown. I mean, the Cincy Tech people and what they're doing down there, it's wonderful. The revitalization that's going on down there because of those young folks investing in those, not only in the community down there and our business leaders investing, but I mean our county and our city and our the greater Cincinnati area, and even this. I mean, of course, I like the suburbs the best.
Sure, because that's where you are.
That's right. But I mean, as a region, we're doing great things. You look in Blue Ash and Deer Park and the things that are developing in Sycamore Township, and even out here, we're getting some reinvestment dollars. We're getting businesses to come in and invest in the tech sector and medical industries and aerospace. We've got most of the F-35 components being built in this district. I mean, that's neat stuff.
Yeah.
So we have a lot to offer for young folks that are looking to gain a new skill or relocate and raise a family. I'd argue that our school systems are some of the best in the state, let alone the country. We have some of the best economic opportunities. There's some things that we need to work on definitively, but I think it's about setting a vision and working towards those goals. Ohio has always been a leader for the country. We just forgot that sometimes, We just need to look back at our history and see what we've led in and then make a decision that we're going to lead in everything moving forward. And I think that's a decision that every Ohioan needs to make for themselves. I'm here because I want to make Ohio the best place to do business in the country, because if it is, then everything else takes care of itself. We'll have the resources to provide our infrastructure, take care of our schools, our kids, and our seniors.
I think that's a great way not only to end it, but I think that you pinpoint something very important, that Ohio has always been a place that, yes, you talk about your Virginias and your East Coast sides, but we've had our fair share of presidents, and a lot of great movers and shakers have come from this, not just from this area, but from the state itself.
That's right.
So to finally, again, you have people actually wanting to go see Alexander Hamilton's grave more often now. So I mean,
That's right. That's right.
and poor little Hamilton now gets its own little shine in
That's right.
the new world. But no, I think what we're seeing now is a renaissance, so to speak. And I'll just put it as clearly to this as an ending question to you. As this renaissance continues, do you think it's a quick flash, or is it something that's going to be lasting?
I personally believe that it's lasting because Ohio always has always been on the forefront of innovation. We always have been. We lost it and missed it in the 90s, but I think that was partially because we're highly conservative. We might be purple, sure. But that's just how we vote, but that's not how we think and operate. I mean, we're very family-oriented in the state. Mm-hmm. We're community-oriented. Folks go to their church and their synagogue, and especially across the district, or or their temples, and they're very faith-oriented. They're very family-oriented. They're community-oriented. That's the way we've always been. I think the challenge that we have moving forward is, we're a region that I like to use the Procter & Gamble analogy, right? I mean, yes. That's what we know, and it's that you can either work there or you can invest your money there, and you're going to get a guaranteed rate of return essentially over a long period of time. It's bulletproof on recessions by and large. We talked about that earlier. Everybody
yes.
needs their toothpaste, and everybody needs their soap, and whether economy's good or bad, those are things that people can still consume. So we have a lot of really good, solid blue chip companies that stabilize our region. And so that's kind of what we're used to. Hollywood got the, they've got the idea of, you invest in a movie, 1 out of 99 you make money and the rest you lose. So for the tech sector to go out there, people were okay with the gamble and the risk because that's what they were used to. So I think part of it is the culture of that area. Same thing with Texas and Carolinas. They're used to high risk environments, and we're a little bit more traditional in that approach, just financially and across the board. So I think what we have to do is provide these young budding entrepreneurs the tools and the resources that they need to say, you know what, I want to stay here in Ohio. I don't want to go to Silicon Valley. The cost of living is better here. The quality of life's better here. We may not have a beach, we may not have mountains, but we got great people. We've got a beautiful city. We've got a beautiful region. We've got great parks. We've got good infrastructure. You can be anywhere in the country in a short period of time. And we're in a perfect time zone to do business across the country, right?
It's very true.
So, and we have great logistics. So there's no reason why you shouldn't make Ohio, especially the greater Cincinnati area, your place to live and build your business. So I think that's part of it, is giving the tools and the resources to our entrepreneurs, especially our young folks that, they think it's nicer to go to Texas or to California. But you know what, that's fine. Go over there and get your education, but come home.
Come home.
Come home, because we want you here. We need you here. This is where you were raised, and you're not going to find a better place to raise your family.
That is the perfect way to end. I can't ask for anything more. But the thing I can ask for is that if anybody would like to get in contact with you, as you said earlier, we are in an area that likes to have contact with one another, and I think that's what makes our House of Representatives so great. You can always get a hold of you at the 77 South High Street on the 11th floor in Columbus, 43215. Write that long letter. He likes to read them all. 614-466-8120 is the phone number, and rep28 at ohiohouse.gov is the email. And I know that you get in contact. If you don't get in contact, you at least have some type of contact with them in some form or another.
Well, I do read it all.
And that says a lot. I think we've gotten into a political arena where people say one thing, do another, but I think in our fair state, we don't see that. And I
Not
think
so
that's
much.
what makes it great.
But thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us. As always, we'll have you back probably during the summer break, and we'll discuss the first half, and we know where the next half leads you.
Yes, sir.
So until then, I want to thank you. And of course, I want to thank all of you for joining us as well. I hope this has been an educational experience for you as well. Join us every month here on the Columbus Report as we bring those in the know here to discuss your district. I'm Jason Grisgorick, Waycross Community Media's Government Access Coordinator, giving you the opportunity to talk with those in the know here on the Columbus Report. Have a great evening, and we will see you next time.